Tell me when a guest becomes part of a marriage. Does it happen when a wife seats him beside her, or only when her husband decides he no longer belongs? I never called our marriage open. I only refused to let my husband's insecurity decide who could enter our home. He would slide his chair back, ask one careful question, and then make coffee as if good manners could hide fear. I took every quiet answer as proof that he needed me too much to leave. By Thanksgiving, I had placed one more man beside me, and I was certain my husband would move again. My name is Harper. I was 42 and had been married to Daniel for 8 years. We had been together for 11. I led a regional sales team for a pharmaceutical company, which meant I spent most weeks moving between clinics, airport lounges, hotel bars, and rooms full of people who expected me to hold their attention. Daniel managed supply routes for a hospital network. He could see a delayed shipment on a screen and tell which loading dock, driver, and nurse would feel the result. He was good at preventing problems that nobody noticed unless he failed. That calm nature had once made me feel safe. During our second year together, my car died 3 hours from home after a winter sales meeting. Daniel drove through freezing rain, brought a blanket and a flask of coffee, and never complained that I had ignored the warning light for a week. When my father had surgery, Daniel learned the medication schedule before I did. He did not make speeches about love. He arrived early, carried the heavy bag, and stayed after everyone else had gone. We bought our walnut dining table from Daniel's father before he died. It was not expensive, but the old man had sanded the top himself. Daniel repaired one corner and built a matching chair after we moved into our house. His chair sat at the end nearest the kitchen. On Sunday mornings, he read work messages there while I told him about clients and office fights. I used to place my feet in his lap under the table. Back then, his silence felt like room for me to breathe. Years later, the same silence began to feel empty. I would return from a trip excited about a difficult contract, and Daniel would ask whether I had eaten. If I complained that a woman on my team was trying to replace me, he would offer a practical plan instead of sharing my anger. During arguments, he often went quiet until he could speak without raising his voice. Sometimes he waited so long that the feeling had passed and only the distance remained. I told my best friend Jessa that I lived with a man who could turn a fire into a list of safety steps. She asked whether I wanted warmth or smoke. That question stayed with me because I already knew my answer. I wanted proof that I could still make someone reckless. The idea was not new. Before Daniel, I had dated Noah for 2 difficult years. Noah forgot birthdays, vanished for days, and returned with enough charm to make me forgive him. Our fights ended with slammed doors and desperate apologies. When he left me, he said our relationship had lost its spark. I carried that word into my marriage without admitting it. Spark came to mean danger. If a man was afraid to lose me, I thought he should show it badly. Adrian, a new account manager on my team, gave me my first chance to test Daniel. Adrian was handsome in an easy way. He knew when to loosen his tie, when to remember a receptionist's name, and when to let a woman notice that he had noticed her. After a successful quarter, I invited him to our house for drinks. I told Daniel it would be rude to make a colleague sit alone at a hotel bar. I put Adrian in the chair beside mine. Daniel's place remained at the end of the table, but I turned my body toward Adrian and kept my back half facing my husband. I touched Adrian's forearm when I laughed. I told a story about Daniel leaving a concert early because he had an early shift. Adrian joked that some men were born old. I laughed before Daniel could decide whether it was funny. Daniel moved his chair back by the width of his hand. He did that whenever he was about to ask a question he expected me to dislike. He asked Adrian whether I had told him that our marriage was open. Adrian almost dropped his glass. He said I had told him nothing like that. I was angry at Daniel for embarrassing a guest, so I said only an insecure husband would turn friendly contact into a sexual threat. Daniel accepted my answer, made coffee, and asked Adrian whether he needed a ride to his hotel. The next week, Adrian stopped sending the late messages that had made work more fun. He still flirted in meetings, but only when other people were present. When I asked why he had become formal, He said Daniel's question had made the situation strange. I decided Daniel had frightened him on purpose. At home, I accused my husband of acting polite so nobody would see how controlling he was. Daniel said he was not asking me to avoid male friends. He was asking me not to use another man to punish him. I told him that was a dramatic way to describe one evening. He slid his chair back into place and did not mention Adrian again. His restraint irritated me more than a fight would have. I wanted him to demand that Adrian stay away. Then I could have called him jealous and enjoyed the proof that he cared. Instead, he cooked dinner, packed my lunch for an early flight, and behaved as if I had not placed a challenge beside me at our own table. Jessa said Daniel had failed the test because he refused to play. She had been divorced twice and described herself as realistic about men. According to her, a marriage stayed alive only when both people knew they could be replaced. I liked that idea. It made my need for attention sound like work I was doing for us. Noah returned to my life 3 months later through a social media message. He was coming through our city and wanted to see old friends. I answered before telling Daniel. By the time I mentioned it, I had already invited Noah to a small party at our house. Daniel knew who Noah was. He also knew what that relationship had done to me. He asked why a man I had once called cruel needed to stand in our kitchen. I said people grew up and that refusing to forgive was unhealthy. What I did not say was that I wanted Noah to see the house, the career, and the husband I had built after him. I also wanted Daniel to see the man who had once made me lose control. Noah arrived with expensive wine and the same careless smile. I introduced him as the reason I had once missed a final exam and slept in a train station. Those stories made our past sound wild rather than painful. Each time Daniel tried to join the conversation, I corrected a detail or told him he could not understand because he had never done anything impulsive. At dinner, Noah reached Daniel's chair first. Daniel paused, then took the empty seat across from me. I noticed him run his thumb over the repaired corner of the table. He asked Noah one plain question. He wanted to know whether I had said Daniel and I were separated. Noah looked at me before answering. He said I had described the marriage as emotionally finished, although I had never used the word separated. I laughed and explained that women sometimes needed to speak freely about lonely feelings. Daniel asked whether I felt emotionally finished. I told him he was choosing the worst possible time for a serious conversation. Noah left before dessert. He sent me a short message the next morning saying he had not come to restart anything and did not want to become part of a marriage problem. I called him a coward to Jessa. She said Daniel had probably cornered him after I went to bed. I did not ask Noah whether that was true. The idea suited me. Then there was Leo, my trainer. He was 10 years younger than I was and made every client feel like the most disciplined person in the gym. He began sending reminders at night, then jokes, then photographs of meals he thought I should eat. I answered from bed while Daniel slept beside me. Nothing in the messages proved an affair. Their value came from the fact that Daniel could see my face brighten and knew the attention was not for him. I invited Leo to have a drink with us after a charity fitness event. Daniel said he would rather spend the evening alone with me. I told him the event mattered to my professional image and that Leo had helped me prepare. Daniel came because I said his absence would make people wonder about us. At the hotel bar, I sat between them. Leo praised my energy and said most women my age did not train with the same hunger. Daniel asked him what he meant by most women my age. Leo became nervous and tried to explain. I accused Daniel of searching for insults because he did not know how to accept another man's admiration for his wife. Daniel moved his chair back that familiar distance. He asked Leo whether he believed our meetings outside the gym were dates. Leo said he had understood them as friendly drinks connected to training. He left soon after. 2 days later, the nighttime messages stopped. I deleted part of our chat because Daniel had begun checking the shared tablet when music appeared on it from my phone. The deletion was not about guilt, I told myself. It was about preventing a calm man from building a false case out of harmless words. I did not remember that the tablet kept its own copy. Daniel asked me to stop bringing men into disagreements that belonged to us. This time, he did not hide behind careful language. He said he felt as if every complaint I had about him arrived with a replacement standing nearby. I answered that replacements worried only people who had stopped making an effort. That was the closest I came to saying what I wanted. Daniel had stopped reaching for me during conflict. He listened, waited, and repaired whatever could be measured. If I said I felt alone, he cleaned the kitchen or planned a weekend away. He could solve every task except the one in front of him, which was to let me see him need me. He admitted that he withdrew because our fights left him confused. He said I could turn one feeling into 10 accusations before he understood the first. He wanted time to think. I heard only another excuse for being dull. Daniel had tried, in his way, to close the distance. For our anniversary, he booked the same small lake cabin where we had spent our first weekend together. He left both phones in the car and cooked the meal we had eaten there 11 years earlier. The effort was obvious. I focused instead on the planned walk and the time we would leave on Sunday. I told Jessa the trip felt like romance arranged by a warehouse manager. When Daniel asked why I kept checking my phone in the parking lot, I said silence with him had started to feel like being left alone. He did not argue. He sat on the cabin steps until dark and asked what excitement would look like if no other person was there to witness it. I could not describe it without sounding childish. I said he should already know. He answered that guessing had become dangerous because whatever he chose was later used as proof that he did not understand me. I carried that sentence home and treated it as another failure to act. Wes entered our house through Jessa. He played guitar at a restaurant where she often drank, and she thought his life would loosen me. Wes had long hair, an old motorcycle, and no interest in schedules. He came over one Friday to play music in our living room. Daniel had worked a 12-hour day, yet he ordered food for everyone and moved furniture so Wes could set up. I watched Daniel carry an extra chair from the dining room and felt embarrassed by him. A man with stronger pride would have refused to serve someone who was clearly interested in his wife. I let Wes choose Daniel's chair at the table. When Daniel brought him a cup of coffee, I caught Jess's eye and smiled. She understood exactly what I was proving. Wes told stories about sleeping on beaches and playing for strangers in small towns. I said Daniel once planned our vacation in a spreadsheet with color codes. Daniel replied that I had asked him to do that after we missed a flight the year before. I said the reason did not make it less boring. Later, while Wes packed his guitar, Daniel asked whether I had invited him as a musician or as a man I wanted. Wes gave a tired laugh and said he had understood it as a party. I stepped between them and said Daniel was making another guest responsible for his own lack of confidence. Wes declined my next invitation. He said he liked me but did not want a private dinner if Daniel believed there was more to it. I blamed Daniel again. It did not occur to me that Wes had made his own choice. Owen, our divorced neighbor, was easier to keep close. He lived 3 houses away and had recently lost most of his social circle with his marriage. He came over to borrow tools, stayed for coffee, and began telling me how empty his home felt. I enjoyed being the person he wanted to see at the end of the day. Daniel was kind to him at first. He helped Owen move a heavy cabinet and invited him for Sunday breakfast. I changed the arrangement without discussing it. Owen started coming over when Daniel worked late. I poured wine and told him about the parts of my marriage that disappointed me. When Daniel arrived, Owen would already be in his chair. One evening, Owen made a joke about husbands who let their wives handle all the interesting conversation. I waited for Daniel to defend himself. Daniel placed his keys on the table, moved his chair back by one hand, and asked Owen whether I had told him he was welcome to come over without checking first. Owen said I had given him a spare key for emergencies. Daniel looked at me. The key was one we kept under a flower pot, and I had told Owen to use it if I was running late. I said neighbors with healthy trust did such things all the time. Daniel asked for it back. Owen placed it on the table and went home. I did not speak to Daniel for 2 days. In my version, the key was practical and his request was a public display of ownership. In his version, which I refused to hear, A lonely man had been walking into our house while the husband who lived there did not know. Owen became distant after that. He waved from his driveway but stopped coming inside. I sent Jessa a message saying that I could invite any man I wanted because Daniel was too weak to leave me. She answered with a row of laughing faces and said I had trained him well. That message pleased me. It turned Daniel's patience into something I had achieved. I began using the word doormat around Jessa and 2 women from my sales team. My favorite example was Daniel making coffee for a man I brought home. I left out his questions and the fact that the men usually stepped away after answering them. Daniel changed in small ways. He no longer waited up when I traveled. He stopped asking what I wanted for Sunday breakfast and cooked for himself. At the table, he rested both hands around his mug instead of touching my ankle with his foot. I noticed every change and told myself he was trying to punish me. One Sunday, he asked me to eat with him without guests or phones. He had made eggs and cut fruit the way I liked. Owen knocked before we sat down because I had told him he could borrow our pressure washer. I invited him inside and poured a 3rd cup of coffee. Daniel did not object. He simply covered his own plate and put it in the refrigerator. I followed him to the hall and accused him of performing sadness. Daniel said a private breakfast could not survive if I treated every knock as a better offer. I told him Owen needed help, and that kindness should not depend on a schedule. Daniel looked past me toward the table, where Owen was waiting in his chair. Then he took his coat and went for a walk. Owen felt uncomfortable and left without the pressure washer. I was furious with both men. One had refused to fight for the morning, and the other had refused to enjoy winning it. By evening, I had rewritten the scene for Jessa so that Daniel appeared jealous of a neighbor asking for a tool. He also began writing dates in a black notebook he kept near his work bag. I saw him open it after Owen returned the key. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was trying to remember events in the order they happened. I joked that only Daniel could turn a marriage into a shipping report. Jessa thought the notebook was funny. She said a man who took notes instead of taking action had already surrendered. Her certainty gave me permission to ignore the expression Daniel wore when he ran his thumb over the repaired corner of his father's table. By late summer, I was less interested in any one man than in the pattern they created. Adrian made work exciting, Noah carried my old danger, Leo offered admiration, Wes brought a life without plans, and Owen gave me daily need. I used each one to show Daniel a quality I said he lacked. If he complained, I said he was insecure. If he stayed calm, I said he did not care. There was no answer he could give that I would accept. I did not see that as unfair. I saw it as proof that he needed to become someone else. Caleb, Daniel's younger brother, became the final test because he already belonged at our table. He was 36, single, and had the social ease Daniel never tried to develop. Caleb sold commercial property and could walk into a tense room as if everyone had been waiting for him. He loved Daniel, but he also teased him about old clothes and early bedtimes. I mistook that brotherly habit for permission. Daniel's mother, Ruth, asked us to host Thanksgiving because our dining room was larger than hers. Daniel planned the meal, checked allergies, and repaired the loose leg on the chair Caleb usually used. I treated the work as evidence that he cared more about a smooth dinner than about me. I began messaging Caleb about the menu. The conversation moved from food to childhood stories about Daniel. I asked whether Daniel had always been so careful. Caleb answered that his brother had been careful since their father became ill. I said someone should teach him that life was not an emergency plan. One night, after 2 glasses of wine, I told Caleb that he had received all the charm in the family. He did not answer until morning. Then he said I should not send messages like that after midnight. I replied that he was beginning to sound like his brother. Caleb turned his phone face down the next time he visited. I read his discomfort as interest he was afraid to show. That was how I read every retreat. Men did not leave because they disliked what I was doing. They left because Daniel had made the price too high. Daniel saw Caleb's name appear on the shared tablet while we ate breakfast. He did not pick it up. He moved his chair back by one hand and asked whether I was trying to make him compete with his own brother. I said Caleb and I were planning a family meal. Daniel asked why menu planning happened after midnight. I accused him of reading my messages. He said the preview had appeared in front of both of us. I told him a confident man would laugh at a harmless compliment. He said confidence did not require him to pretend something felt harmless. For once, Daniel did not return his chair to the table. He left it back and went to the garage. I found him sanding the worn edge of the walnut table extension that we used for large dinners. Dust covered his hands. His father's pencil mark was still visible under the wood. Daniel said he had spent years asking for a place in his own marriage. He said he could not keep inviting himself to a table where I used every empty chair as a threat. His voice was low, and he looked more tired than angry. For a moment, I understood him. I saw Adrian in my chair, Noah in his, Leo between us, Wes accepting coffee, and Owen entering with a key. None of those scenes had happened by accident. I had arranged every seat. Then Daniel asked whether I would show him the full conversation with Caleb. The brief understanding vanished. I said he had turned a vulnerable moment into another inspection. I told him that if he trusted me, he would not need proof. He wiped the dust from his hands and said trust was not a demand one person could make while hiding the evidence that would support it. I left the garage believing I had won. He had finally admitted that the other men affected him. The pain I had wanted was there. Instead of feeling guilty, I felt desired. The week before Thanksgiving, the pattern around me began to change. Adrian asked that we keep our messages inside the company system. Leo transferred my training sessions to another coach. Wes stopped replying, and Owen avoided the side of the street near our house. Noah sent one final note saying he hoped I repaired whatever I was trying to break. I treated all of it as Daniel's campaign against me. Caleb still planned to attend dinner. That mattered most. I chose a fitted green dress Daniel had once liked and asked Jessa whether it was too much for a family meal. She said it was perfect if I wanted Daniel to remember that even his brother could notice what he ignored. Ruth called the night before to ask about the seating. She wanted Caleb near her because his hearing was poor on one side after an old accident. I knew that was true, but I told her the cards were already arranged. She paused, then said I should think carefully about where I placed people. The remark felt larger than the question. I asked whether Daniel had been telling stories about me. Ruth said her son had spent too long protecting my version of events and ended the call before I could press her. I moved Caleb's place card beside mine as soon as Daniel went to bed. It was a small choice, no more serious than moving a glass, yet I felt the same thrill I had felt before Adrian's first visit. I was not thinking about Caleb as a future partner. I was thinking about Daniel seeing his own brother occupy the space I had taught him to surrender. On Thanksgiving morning, Daniel was already in the kitchen when I woke. He had set the walnut table with his mother's old dishes. There were 12 chairs, including the one he had built. He checked the temperature of the turkey and moved through the room with the quiet focus I had learned to hate. I asked whether he planned to spend the whole day hiding behind food. He said he was trying to make the day comfortable for his family. I said comfort was his answer to everything. He asked what answer I wanted instead. That question gave me a chance to be honest. I told him he had stopped fighting for our closeness long before other men appeared. When I was angry, he withdrew. When I was lonely, he offered a task. He made himself useful so he would never have to be exposed. Daniel accepted that. He said his silence had hurt me and that he had used calmness to avoid fear. I felt a sharp relief because he had finally admitted I was right about something. Then he asked whether his failure had given me permission to recruit an audience for every wound between us. I said the men were friends and that he was choosing ugly words. He asked why each friendship required a comparison with him. I told him comparisons happened only when one person refused to grow. Daniel looked at the place settings and said nothing more. His silence felt like surrender. I went upstairs to finish dressing. Ruth arrived first. She kissed Daniel, studied his face, and helped him carry dishes. When I offered her wine, she said she wanted a clear head. The answer annoyed me because it sounded prepared. I wondered what Daniel had told her. Jessa had said she might stop by for dessert, but the extra place near the window stayed empty. I sent her a photograph of my dress and the table. She did not answer. I decided family evenings were too dull for her and put my phone beside my plate. Caleb came 20 minutes later with pie. He hugged Daniel longer than usual and greeted me without touching me. I teased him for becoming formal. He said it was a family day and handed the pie to Ruth. At the table, I placed Caleb beside me. Daniel's chair stood at the far end, close enough for him to hear every word. I asked Caleb about a recent sale and laughed louder than the story deserved. When he reached for salt, I touched his wrist and kept my hand there for a second. He pulled away to fill his water glass. Caleb described a client who had changed the terms of a large deal at the last minute. I praised him for walking away instead of accepting disrespect. Daniel looked up when I said a real man knew when to leave the table. I meant the comment as a challenge. Caleb heard something else in it and asked me whether I understood what I had just praised. I said business was different from marriage because a spouse had obligations. Daniel asked whether those obligations belonged to both people. I told him loyalty meant staying present when the other person was difficult. Ruth asked whether loyalty also meant protecting the person who stayed. Her question irritated me because nobody had asked me what Daniel's silence had cost. Daniel's aunt asked about our summer. I described my trips and said Daniel had enjoyed staying home with his schedules. Caleb changed the subject, but I brought it back. I said Daniel could learn from a brother who knew how to enter a room without checking the exits. Daniel's aunt reminded me that he had spent the summer covering extra hospital routes while 2 workers were ill. I answered that being useful was not the same as being alive. Daniel did not defend himself. He passed Ruth the potatoes and asked Caleb about his new office. His refusal to answer made me feel invisible at my own table, so I made the comparison sharper. I said Caleb could lose a deal and still remain interesting, while Daniel could save a hospital from running out of supplies and make the story sound like a weather report. Caleb told me that Daniel's work did not exist to entertain me. I replied that a husband should sometimes try. Nobody laughed. I blamed the slow mood on the family. They treated Daniel's quietness as depth because they had never lived beside it. After the plates were cleared, Caleb helped Daniel bring out dessert. I followed them into the kitchen and told Caleb he looked better carrying something Daniel had made. Caleb asked me to stop. His voice was soft, which made the request easy to ignore. Back at the table, Ruth asked Daniel whether he wanted to say anything. That was when I knew the family had discussed me. I decided not to let them control the room. With my glass raised, I said Daniel deserved thanks for creating such a comfortable evening. I added that comfort was his special skill, even when a wife wanted something exciting. Ruth set down her fork. Daniel's aunt stared at her plate. Caleb told me I had said enough. I laughed and asked why everyone was suddenly afraid of a joke. Then I said perhaps Caleb should join our marriage. At least one of the brothers might know how to make it exciting. The room became so quiet that I heard the refrigerator start in the kitchen. Daniel did not look at Caleb. He looked at me and moved his chair back by the width of his hand. He asked how many men I had invited into our marriage without ever asking him. I could have stopped. Instead, I saw every person watching and felt the old need to prove that Daniel could not move me. I said there had been enough men for me to know that none of them would tolerate being as boring as he was. Daniel remained seated. In my mind, that settled it. I had pushed harder than ever, and he was still there. Then Daniel pushed his chair all the way back and stood. He was not shaking. He did not raise his voice. A small, tired smile appeared on his face, the kind he used when a delayed truck finally reached the correct hospital. He said I had wanted other men in our marriage, so from that moment they could have his place. He placed his ring beside his plate. Caleb stood too, but Daniel asked him to remain. He said the family needed to hear the answer to the question I had been forcing him to ask for years. I turned the stem of my glass until the wine touched the rim. My hand remained there while Daniel opened the black notebook. He did not read insults or private fantasies. He read the answers men had given when he asked what they believed I had offered them. Adrian had said he enjoyed flirting but had never understood me to be available. He had stepped back because he did not want a relationship with me. Noah had said I described my marriage as dead whenever I wanted attention, then defended it whenever he asked what that meant. Leo had understood me as a married client and ended the messages when he saw that I was using them at home. Wes had come to play music, not to compete for a wife. Owen had accepted the key because he was lonely, then returned it because Daniel's question made him ashamed. Each answer matched a retreat I had already seen. I had called the men cowards, blamed Daniel, and invited someone new. The pattern had never been Daniel chasing rivals away. It had been Daniel asking them to name what I was doing. Once they named it, they did not want it. Caleb placed his phone on the table. He had saved my late messages and his requests that I stop. He said Daniel had not asked him to trap me. Caleb had gone to his brother because I kept turning a family conversation into something he did not want. Ruth said she had known the names before dinner because Daniel had asked whether his family would stand beside him if I tried to make Caleb another public test. I reached for the defense that had always worked. I said nothing physical had happened. Daniel agreed. He said he was not leaving because he could prove I had slept with someone. He was leaving because I had made loyalty look weak, pain look entertaining, and every boundary look like fear. I accused him of planning the dinner against me. He said he had planned to eat with his family. I had chosen the rest. Daniel went upstairs and returned with one suitcase that had already been packed. The zipper was closed, and his overnight shoes were tied to the handle. He had not stood because my final joke suddenly changed him. He had stood because he had already decided that the next public test would be the last. At home that night, the shared tablet held the parts of my chats I thought I had deleted. Beside, it was a folder with restaurant charges, hotel bar receipts, photographs, and the dates when Daniel had asked me to stop. At the top was a printout of my message to Jessa saying I could invite any man I wanted because Daniel was too weak to leave me. The divorce petition and temporary financial schedule arrived the next morning, and the rest went through attorneys without another family meeting. I moved from our house into a one-bedroom apartment where the dining space was wide enough for a table and only 2 chairs. The trips, drinks, gifts, and separate nights I had called harmless left me paying debts I had hidden inside our shared budget. Jessa stopped answering after I blamed her advice, while Ruth and the rest of Daniel's family removed me from every gathering I had once hosted. Adrian kept all contact professional. Noah blocked me. Leo stayed with the transfer. Wes never replied. Owen crossed the street, and Caleb sent one final message saying his brother was not a place I could offer away. At work, people who had laughed at my stories stopped treating them as charm after Adrian explained why he no longer met me alone, and I lost the informal trust that had helped me lead my team. Weeks later, while we divided the last things in the empty house, I asked Daniel to try again. He asked why, if the other men had made me feel alive, I wanted the boring one back. I could not answer without admitting that Daniel was the only man who had chosen a life with me. I had treated his choice as proof that he had none. Daniel removed the legs from his father's table and carried his chair through the front door. I had spent years offering Daniel's chair to other men. After he left, not one of them sat down.